So Candice, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nick, for this fantastic opportunity to share a little bit about my own journey and really my own leadership journey. And I think the first question is such an important question because I guess for me, your roots is important and where you come from. So I was born and raised in Johannesburg. So I grew up in Johannesburg, but in a very small little township next to Orlando East, which is part of the Greater Soweto district, called Noordgesig. And I think a lot of people, if you say Noordgesig, they wouldn't know what this little suburb is about, this little residential area. But that's where I was born. And then as I grew up, we then moved into different parts of Johannesburg. So that's essentially where I come from.
And Candice, what was your dream career when you grew up?
So as a little girl, and having grown up in a township, we weren't afforded opportunities to often go on expensive holidays or vacations. And I would always look up to the sky and see these aircrafts, flying across. And I would always wonder, what would it be like to fly in one of those aircraft? So as a little girl, my dream was to become an air hostess because I thought that's the only way that I will actually get to experience air travel. Which is obviously very different from where my career unfolded as I went into high school. But that was my first career dream, was to board an aircraft and to experience the world and different cultures from a different perspective.
And tell us, who inspired you in your early days?
So in my very early days, I was really inspired by my maths teacher, and he's late now. So this was my primary school career. And believe it or not, but I was a very sort of drawn back young girl, a little bit nerdy, focused on my academics. And I took on leadership roles early at school. But he saw potential in a little 12-year-old. And he created opportunities for me to participate in maths competitions and Olympiads. And at the end of my primary schooling career, I actually won the Top Achiever Maths Award at the school. And because of that, I was then afforded the opportunity to go on scholarship to a girls' high school. And for me, I think that really changed my trajectory because having been born and bred in a township, you don't necessarily have access to the best schooling systems. And I think because he saw the potential at an early age and he saw the underbubbling leadership traits I had, he then put me in contact with a girls' school. I went for the assessments and I started my high schooling career outside of the township, so more in the inner city. It was a part boarding facility, so I could really spend time developing my high schooling career, but also my leadership journey during my teen years. So he was my maths teacher, was really the first person that saw the potential and inspired me to reach beyond my circumstances.
And Candice, you've been leading teams at some of South Africa's leading brands, all the way from Standard Bank, SA Breweries, Barloworld, Pernod Ricard, BIT, and now AECI. What would you say have been the highlights, maybe just a few highlights from your career?
I think the first highlight of my career was probably at Barloworld. I was there for a few years in an human resources executive role. And in one of the senior leadership conferences, which was really a congregation of all the senior leaders from different parts of the business, different parts of the world. And again, at that point in time, the executive committee saw the potential in me and my passion for what I do. And I was afforded to present on this global stage talent strategy. And I think it wasn't just so much around the content that I delivered, but I was part of a team of other human resources executives, well experienced in their fields and within the business. We collaborated on the topic. We pulled together the slides in a short space of time. And I think taking the stage on at that early age in my career in front of an international audience, and being able to deliver a compelling proposition from a talent point of view, but that's also been consulted in on with other executives. I think that really was a highlight of my career, because it gave me the sense that you can really make a contribution, but also it's the audiences that you make this contribution to and that you tap into that will really make the change that we want to see from a talent point of view. So I think for me, volleyball was definitely one of my highlights. A second highlight for me would be Pernod Ricard, which is a French multinational in spirits and wines. And for me, the one highlight of working in that organization is that whichever parts of the business I traveled to, whether in Africa or in Europe, they were headquartered in Paris, they really somehow managed to instill the sense of identity and culture within the organization. It was very tangible for me. And I think at Pernod Ricard, you get the sense that, when we talk about culture and values, it's not something that's on an annual report, but people really lived it. So in the interactions I had with my colleagues from across the continent, across Europe, the many opportunities I had to travel into different parts of the business, they had the saying that they are creators of conviviality. And when I joined, I was very intrigued by what they mean by conviviality. And this is really something that I experienced in the way they ran the business, but also in the way they led their people. So for me, that was definitely a highlight. And I think if I have to share one more highlight, maybe from my more recent experience with AECI, and it's going to sound strange, but I took on the role at the onset of what we now understand to be a global pandemic. So I joined the organization in Jan 2020. And in March 2020, the organization, like a lot of organizations, went into lockdown. And what I discovered about the organization and its people is that when people are in crisis, they know how to pull together. And I was able to make a meaningful contribution in a short space of time with people that really didn't know me because I just joined the organization. But we were able to craft and put together a compelling response plan to navigate our organization through a crisis. And when I talk about our organization, we operate in 6 continents, over 7,500 employees, in 22 countries across 4 different business pillars. So from Indonesia, Australia, all the way through to Africa, Europe, US, and Brazil. And yet within that context, we've been able throughout this journey, a year into reflection, to pay everybody, to not have COVID-directed retrenchments, to keep our employees safe, to provide them with the necessary PPE and sanitizers and reinduction back into the workplace. And we've been able to keep our employees gainfully employed, but also to secure their economic dignity. And I think this is unfortunately one of the consequences of COVID, that it's really eroded a lot of economic dignity for a lot of citizens because of the impact it had on the economy. But whilst we were able to do that as a team, and under my leadership and supported by the CEO, we were also able to feed over 12,000 families through a food security program, because we could see the communities in which we were operating was taking a lot of strain. And I think when I shared this at our last leadership meeting, I said, you know what, guys, because as a team, we were able to come together and we were able to support, we made a tangible difference in someone's life. Someone was able to eat that day and have a meal in the midst of a pandemic. So I think for me, Dr. Nick, those will probably be some of my highlights that comes to mind.
Thank you. And Candice, what would you say is driving you today?
What's driving me today is one word, and that's purpose. And I think as we progress in life and as we have different experiences, it's a question I grapple with often. What is my purpose in the world, and how do I bring that purpose to life? And I think that purpose can take on different formats at different stages of life, depending where we find ourselves in our personal journey. It will take on a different direction. But for me, it's around developing that purpose that I inherently have to lead, to make an impact, to make a difference in society. And that's what drives me, whether it's good days, bad days, in between days. It's really, how do I bring my purpose to life?
Now, Candice, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
I think, we come historically, and especially when you think about management training and the way management theory was developed in the past 50, 100 years, very much based on war principles, military principles, very heavily influenced by egocentric male type of leadership. And I think as you look at different generations in the workplace, this had its place at a point in time, but we find ourselves in a society that's demanding a human-centric leadership approach. And I think for me, it's around, how do you lead people with humanity, and how do you lead them with integrity? And for me, that should be the future of leadership, is that we have to move away from this very harsh reality of, people are capital to be deployed, to a human-centric approach, that people have talent to deploy, and how do we uncover that talent, and how do we create meaningful roles and a meaningful workplace for them?
And Candice, what would you say is most important for building future leaders? What is it that you've learned from your own journey? What do we have to do to empower future leaders?
I think that is such an opportune question, because oftentimes people that is really high performers, we assume that they are the best leaders. But what I've seen in my experience is that leadership really requires that social nuance, understanding the importance of developing and building relationships. And that's something that I've experienced in my own personal leadership journey. You can be the most qualified and the most experienced, but if you're not able to use that knowledge to influence change in others, you're not going to be a very successful leader. And it's that ability of leaders to influence change through the way they behave, but also to build those social relationships and to build that cohesion, that will really be a key component of leaders in the future.
Now, Candice, when you speak to aspiring leaders, what is it you tell them about social media? How should they navigate social media to build their own leadership brand?
I think social media, and I was actually reflecting on this question when I saw it initially. Social media it's got two sides of the same coin. It's providing us the technology to amplify our impact, but at the same time, the same technology that's able to amplify your impact is the same technology that can also create chaos in the world. And we've seen it, right? And I think when it comes to building a brand, a personal brand, and it's so important to say a personal brand, not a professional brand or corporate brand, because in my experience, I've worked for a number of different companies, and each organization will have their own brand and their own corporate identity. But what remained true for me is my personal brand. My personal brand on what you see is what you get, based on integrity, the individual, the energy, the passion I bring to every role, regardless of which organization I find myself in. That's the personal brand that I've honed and developed over time. So what I would suggest to aspiring leaders is, first, understand who you are and what value do you bring to the world, what impact do you want to make, and build on that brand from an authentic point of view. I think we find ourselves in a space in society where social media has the potential to put out personas and brands that's not real. And the runway for that is very short, because eventually people will deal with the real person and they'll actually find out this is not who you pretend to be. So for me, there's nothing more painful then people putting up a certain brand positioning, but yet we know back at the ranch, things is not hanging together in the same way. So it's an ongoing journey for me on my own personal leadership brand. But when you build a brand, understand the impact of that brand, the amplifying effect of social media, and you must be true and authentic to who you are, your own core brand essence. And that would really be my advice to aspiring leaders.
Now, Candice, what would you say? What are some of the biggest challenges future leaders should expect to encounter in their career?
One of the biggest challenges is, believe it or not the changes in technology, fourth industrial revolution, and all the other fancy management terms and theories that we've developed over time. But it's your ability to bounce back. It's the resilience to keep going in the face of adversity. Because leadership is a lonely journey. People in leadership, people will take shots at you. People will question you from time to time. People will try and sink you. That's just how it is. It's human nature. People will talk about you. But at the same time, there will also be people that will support you, that will buy into your vision. There will be people that wants to see the change that you want to see in the world, and they will come alongside you and they will support you in delivering that. And in the balance of those that's for you and those that's against you in leadership, the one thing that will sustain you is resilience. And that's the ability to keep bouncing back from setbacks. But when you do bounce back, is to take that leadership lesson with you in your next chapter.
And Candice, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in?
I think from a leadership point of view, we always talk about technology, but we haven't quite put our arms around it. I think for me, that would be one of the skills. I mean, beyond all the normal general management and leadership skills I've been talking about, but it's really around how do we use technology to amplify our leadership impact? How do we use tools and platforms available today to reach people that we typically wouldn't have been able to reach in the way we currently do business? And I think that is a new field of innovation that needs to be tapped a little bit more from a leadership point of view.
Now, Candice, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
Oh, yes. And I think it's actually, I'm thinking now of CD Anya, that's just been appointed as the HR director at Via Minerals. And CD actually reported into me at BAT. And when it comes to mentoring, for me, it's if I'm your line manager, I'm not just here to manage your performance, but also to coach you on your career journey. And I remember CD was in Johannesburg. She was also busy studying her doctorate in business. And that was our first sort of connection point. She then went through a selection process. I appointed her into the role when we were still in Cape Town. She stayed on in Cape Town. I came back to Joburg. We kept in contact. And on occasion, we would chat around career opportunities. And just this past week, I saw the announcement with CHRO that she's actually been appointed into this role. And before she took the role on, we had a discussion around it. And I think for me, the success around that story is that her potential to take on that role always existed. But sometimes, as a woman in leadership, she's a woman, she's a mom, I'm a mom, and all the nuances around how do we navigate womanhood and leadership, and at the same time, how do we realize our best career potential? And it's in conversations, whether over coffee, over lunch. And when I see these announcements coming out, it makes my heart smile, because it gives me that sense of comfort that just as I've been mentored on my journey, I've had a role to play and I impacted someone's life. And I think for me, that's how we're going to start seeing the change in terms of leadership and really getting women into leadership roles. It's by other women role models, mentoring them, encouraging them, and supporting them on their leadership journey.
And Candice, in your own leadership journey and maybe in your learning journey, who are the role models of leadership that you came across and that you would recommend future leaders should study and learn from?
And I'm going to keep this very personal. I mean, we could go through the internet and come up with the most fantastic names, right? But I'm very wary of just what I see out there in the public domain and actually having engaged with people personally. So I think my leadership role model is my mentor, Professor Shirley Zinn. And I actually had a discussion with her yesterday in terms of my own career, where I'm at, leadership journeys, etc. And what always strikes me about Shirley is her uncompromising position on value-based leadership, integrity, ethics, and at the same time, also her ability in a very calm and calculated manner to make a deep impact in society. So she's definitely one of my role models and someone that I've learned from immensely over the years, and I've really benefited from her mentoring in my own leadership journey.
Now, Candice, how can our listeners connect with you and where should they follow you?
So I've currently built up a followership on LinkedIn for all my professional content. I haven't quite expanded it beyond that as yet. So they can find me on LinkedIn and follow some of my content through LinkedIn. And if they want to get in contact with me, they can always just send me a message through LinkedIn.
Right. And last but not least, Candice, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own life?
And you know, when I read this question, there was one thing that came to mind. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I think I heard Denzel Washington say it once, that ease is the greater threat to progress than hardship. And I think when we think about our own leadership journeys, where I've come from, having worked my way through in a corporate career, those were all hard things to do. Growing up in a township was hard. Apartheid is hard. An unequal society where women's not progressing is hard. Those are hardships. But when we become complacent and we accept the status quo and we accept that this is how society is and how things are supposed to be, we move into a space of ease. And once you find yourself in a space of ease, that's where societal progress ends. So I've had a mantra that I've always told myself, especially when things become difficult on my leadership journey, is that you need to choose your heart. Because whether it is difficult to make the inroads that you want to make, that's hard, or the ease of backing down, that's hard as well. So for me, my only leadership advice that I would give anyone aspiring to take on leadership roles is choose your heart. Because if we all remained at ease, society would never progress.
Well, Candice, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us that it is all about impact, contribution, and actually for shining a light into this world and showing us a way.
Thanks so much, Dr. Nick. And it was really fantastic chatting to you. And thanks for the wonderful opportunity that you've created through this platform for us to share our leadership insights.